Hello guys, welcome to Development Economics. This is lecture 10 and it will be dedicated to poverty. Poverty is one of the major issues that development economists try to deal with. And one of the major goals of World Bank is to fight poverty worldwide and to help the poorest around the world to get closer to that level of development that rich countries enjoy. To deal with poverty, we first need to understand what it is. For this, there are 9 kind of steps to understand, to approach evaluation of poverty. First, we need to develop a quantitative indicator of poverty. What is, who we will consider a poor person? For that indicator, commonly we use income. Daily income is the most common. So there is an international, recognized, again, popularized by World Bank, international level poverty line. So poverty line is that level under which you consider to be poor, above which that you're not considered to be poor. So international poverty line, so that is applied to all the countries, is $125 per day for extreme poverty and $2.5 to $2.5 a day just for poverty. That's adjusted for PPP, so purchase parity. That's adjustment made to compare different countries, so it's adjustment for prices of goods and services in different countries. That is the basics. So first we establish this indicator, poverty line by income. Second, we try to, so first we choose the indicator and then second we establish the threshold. So as I said, 125 for extreme poverty and 250 for considered to be poor. So we establish that as well. That's a threshold. So now we focus on people who are below the poverty line. And even here you can understand, before we go on deeper, that 250 a day here in Hawaii, you would be really in extreme poverty. So that's quite a low line and was chosen mostly for most underdeveloped countries in the world. So in countries like US, you still can be poor even earning way more than this international poverty line, even accounting for the prices as well. So each state, each country actually defines their own limits of poverty line. So World Bank tried to kind of combine them, and they use these actually numbers 125 and 250 mostly because the poorest country, 15th poorest country in the world, chose that as their measure of poverty. So that's like the bottom of the world. However, it doesn't mean that if you earn more than 250 a day, you are not poor. It just, some programs of World Bank, in particular, if you want to finish poverty globally, they try to focus on the most disadvantaged people, and that's how they define them. However, again, it doesn't mean that there are no other poor people who earn more than this poverty line. So the third step is to identify what do they do, those people, what is their occupation, and how they become poor, and of course with the goal to solve the problem. Unfortunately, the question of how they become poor is very problematic. Economists, sometimes you can answer that question, but in most cases it's very hard to identify a reason because there are tons of reasons and again tons of exceptions. You might say, well, they live in some kind of unfortunate weather conditions that doesn't allow them to get a high productivity of work, but then you can find another place in the world that has similar weather conditions but is way higher, highly developed. So it's hard to identify what particularly was a cause of poverty, but in cases that we can, it should be done. And on this step, most important to understand what the people do so we can change their behavior in a way that they will not be poor anymore. So there is a reason why they constantly poor. Like Einstein said, it's the definition of stupidity to do the same thing all over again and expect different results. So you cannot, as a policy expert or as a government economic policy creator, you cannot expect poor people to become rich without changing their behavior, without changing what they do. So, of course, unemployment is one of the reasons, but unemployment again is just kind of an abstract category. Why people are unemployed, why there are no jobs that those people can fill in, and even though there are actually pretty much in all countries there are positions that are not filled. So that's a complex problems, how to deal with that and so on. So the fourth step is to identify the quality of those poor people first. How far are they from a poverty line? If they're just close to the poverty line, so they're kind of poor, but it will take not so much effort or so much additional income for them to cross the poverty line and have a better kind of not considered to be poor. Or if they're way below the poverty line and they cannot, so there should be significant structural changes in their life to completely change their or improve their income. And also to understand whether there is one type of poor people within the country or there are certain subsets of poor people. So there are usually in developing countries, and specifically poor developing countries, the poorest are people who work on the land, like agriculture, faraway regions. That's one type of poor. But there is also another type of poor who live in the cities, homeless people who occupy some poor neighborhoods. Those are different type of poor people, and of course the same program, social program to support them will not work. If you're talking about agriculture region, the programs usually are focused to increase efficiency of agriculture because they're still working, they're not unemployed, they do work, they're just not getting the efficiency from their work. For a number of reasons, they don't get the best yield or they cannot transfer their products. So there are a number of reasons why their activity is not that productive and they're poor, but at least they have an occupation and they do agriculture. So if you talk about usually homeless, unemployed people inside the city, of course some agriculture program will not help them. So you need to create some other, target them, create some other programs that will help them. So within the poor people, you need to identify types of poor people. You need to target your policy on them. The next step is you identify the quality of poverty. So there are three types normally identified, which is chronic poverty, which is poor on, wait a second, where are we now? Oh, I guess it's temporary. So yeah, we have chronic poor people. That's are people that on average are below the poverty line, but sometimes they're above the poverty line. So maybe due to seasonality of agriculture, sometimes, quite often, people have kind of good life during the season of harvest, everything, they are not quite poor. But then during the decline of winter season, or if just maybe they're in a longer seasonality, if in a good year they're rich, they have high harvest, in a bad year, if it's a drought or something, they don't have a harvest and they become poor. So again, that's important. That's type of poverty that in fact most of programs try to target, because you can get results. And for state, specifically for state type of social support, politicians usually want to see results. And the chronic poverty can be solved relatively with easier steps, because again, if you are right below the line basically, or there are times when you're above the line but sometimes you go below due to some factors, so again, bad weather, so then the government can provide some support for these cases when the income goes down, and then the people can kind of stay above the line consistently. And that's also, again, not very costly and quite effective, but also even more effective because it is commonly known that poor people that go below line and stay there, it's hard for them to go back to a normal life. So if there is no government program, it will be actually more costly for the government to keep with those people. So it's easier for the government to catch those people when they're falling right below poverty, to provide them some temporary support and kind of push them back up the line, upper than the line, and then just wait until they become like miserable and then deal with them. So that's why the chronic poverty is target kind of number one. Usually we have also persistent poor. That's the people that always below the poverty line. So here you need significant structural changes. It's not just some event that happened that pushed them. No, they're constantly and usually quite often also within the generations. So it's not just like they're born poor and they die poor and whole their life they're poor. So to solve that, you can imagine, you need quite a lot of resources, capital resources. You need to change and transform their way of life. It's quite complicated, but still, again, World Bank and ahead of that try to solve those issues and provide some kind of long-term structural changes to solve this problem. And the third one is temporary poor, which is usually the result of some event. And particularly global financial crisis could be such an event. A lot of people lost their jobs, a lot of smaller companies that were kind of lost their business at all. People became poor. Even here in the United States, a lot of people became homeless as well, because it was tightly related to housing market. So housing market collapse caused many people to become homeless because they were unable to afford payment, lease payments or rent payments. And of course, if you go to poorer countries, that the impact was even larger. And coming from Ukraine, I also remember myself, because what happened, we had a quite rough 90s. So in 1991, Soviet Union collapsed, and what happened, basically all economic ties disappeared because it was a planned economy. So the government decided where each company will sell their goods. The state was buying all the products and selling all the products. When the state collapsed, no one, basically the whole country, didn't have any job. But as it was temporary and we had some social kind of safety net, as you can call, and that's very important for temporary. The first one is assets. And luckily for people in Ukraine, we had land. It's quite typical to have a private agricultural land, small piece, but that's enough to feed your family. So even in a moment, like a very fast moment when the state collapsed, everyone become unemployed, everyone, or most of the people were not struggling with hunger because they can afford food or trade food with other people. So it's largely agriculture, country with long agriculture traditions. So we managed not to have hunger, even though we didn't have any income. Imagine you, most, even not just half of the country, but pretty much all of the country is technically unemployed. So you don't have any income, but you have food. That's and another thing what we had a lot of assets. So again, by meaning unemployed, the people still were working for companies. It just they were not paid with money, but a lot of people were paid with assets. So because they're still working, it was funny time. Imagine you work in a factory, and instead of wage in dollars, you get paid with whatever factory is produced. If you produce tires, you get paid with tires. So it was quite hard life, of course. People got poor, but you have some assets, so you go to casual market and try to sell them. Not effective as a market economy, but still it's a chance to not go to the poverty. So even though we had quite a rough times, it still were not consistently poor. And assets are one of the main things that keep people from becoming consistently poor when they have a trouble. So there are shocks, it's quite common. Shocks happen even to normal people who have an ordinary job. Average citizen can have some type of shock that will, lose job. Or in US, actually, one of the main reason for poverty is high health insurance cost. And around 30% of homeless people lost their home due to one of their family members got sick. That's a terrific statistic I heard. So there are different shocks that happen to an average person that might lead to poverty. And here assets and again government support in certain ways can prevent them, because unlike, as we're going to see in future, if you are below the poverty line consistently and you become you're trapped in poverty. There is an important concept of poverty trap we're going to discuss later. So we move forward, and we also, the next type of analysis, whatever we move with understanding the poverty, step 6 is to understand within household, and in particular gender and age, whether they're poor people or young people, old people, whether it's mostly women or mostly men, and whether, again, it helps to identify the reasons and the solutions for poverty. Here we can remember Spain is one of the developed countries, but with extremely high unemployment for people in the age of 22 to 30. So young people after college or after high school, their unemployment rate was around 50%. So half of the young people are unemployed. They couldn't find a decent or kind of long-term job to support life, while older people keep their kind of jobs, and with experience that they're more or less fine. So this gives you a solution. Then you need to target this group of people with no experience, just out of college or just even out of high school. You need some government support here because market economy apparently doesn't solve the problem. And 50% unemployment, that's a real crisis. Luckily, again, one of the side things is the data. So when you hear some information, you should also understand that whatever we collect or countries collect, it's not perfect. And especially it's not perfect in developing countries. But even in countries like Spain, this data statistic about unemployment is not capturing that Spain, to a large extent, is similar to Hawaii. It's a touristic place. And those young people, they are officially unemployed, but many of them provide some kind of touristic service. They either rent even their apartment or something, or they provide some fishing excursion, some type of maybe cook, sell some souvenirs, some food on the street. Of course, they're not just laying on the couch, most of them, because social support there is not that strong, so they will basically just die. So they do have some occupation, it's just not a stable job. And because again, it's a touristic destination, that's relatively easy. Easier than, let's say, in Germany, such situation would be very hard to persist. But in Spain, with beaches, a lot of tourists, that's easier. However, it's still a problem that economists try to address and should address. Same with gender and age. So that was age, but with gender is too. Many countries have traditionally that culture, but it also kind of necessity, and also there is basically no other way. But the man is working and woman just staying at home, trying to grow, maybe do some agriculture, but they're not engaged in constant work. I mean, in official, they're not officially employed, and that's again, this fact should be addressed with a specific policy that target women, and that's what happened. World Bank had a lot of specific policies that target, create some job opportunities for women, also to participate in the economy basically, and create some product, get some income, and get out their household from poverty. So that's important stuff too. Number 7, the step is geography. You create a poverty map. You try to map where the poor people live, and that gives you a lot of information as well. Not originally, we already discussed about the group of people, so it's agriculture or city type, but also within the city where the poor people stay. Within the agriculture regions, are there some are those regions are very far away? Maybe that's why they are poor. There is no infrastructure, there is no communication to the trade centers or cities. So that drives again to solution. Whatever we analyze, we want to develop a solution. If poor people, let's say, are in agriculture land that is far away from a trade center, just creating infrastructure, transport infrastructure might be very beneficial, much more beneficial than providing them, some kind of direct income support, because they will be able to work and sell their goods using the, let's say, rail or sea transportation to the trade center, and drive themselves out of poverty. That's very important for countries like Philippines and Indonesia, where there are a lot of islands, bad communication between the islands, so you can have like a normal life or normal average income people in one island. Another island just doesn't have any infrastructure, so people live below poverty line. So that's very important. The next one, the 8th, we try to understand what skills do poor people have, and what skills the economy needs. So obviously, they're not matched. That's usually why people are poor. So, but the government tries to understand how we can transfer that, and why there is no match. Maybe there is a match in some other region. Again, maybe those people are good in agriculture and there is demand in just some other place for such people, so you need to transfer them, migrate, or educate people. That's a traditional number one answer to what to do with poor people. We need to educate them, develop some skills. It's costly, but it's really a long-term working program. If they can get new skills and get a job that is on demand, then they will drive themselves out of poverty. So that's very important. And in this case, you also can evaluate, a kind of think about numerous social programs as well. So depending on what skills they have, what characteristic they have, you can target, and what they need, you can target poor people to support them. So a lot of health issues along the countries in the world with poor people. So bad health, maybe drug addiction as well, very common in US too among the poor people is drug addiction. So a lot of programs target that. If we can just cure them from drug addiction, perhaps they will join the workforce and will not be poor anymore. So that's one problem. So each factor that we can identify as the major reason that contributes to that usually needs a specific treatment. So it's very hard to get a general program that will work everywhere for everyone. Now, usually on a city level or in a district level, you allocate where the poor people live, why they are poor. Maybe there was some factory, that factory closed, they're just unemployed, they don't have any skills, but they are not drug addicts, they don't have any, they're not criminals, they just don't have jobs that suit their skills. So the key idea here is to re-educate people. If it's any type of region, any type of poverty is different, but the key point for you to understand is that you need to target specific problems with a different programs or different approach. And finally, the last ninth step is to kind of model what poor people do. So combine all the below what we talk about and all of what we talked just about, all the 8 steps, and combine it in a model what people do and what particular steps should be changed, what features, and unite it into one. So just before I told that each step need a cure, specific cure, each problem need a specific cure. So on the final stage, you list all the problems and you combine all those cures for different social programs in a kind of larger scale of a government program. So that's a look on the poverty that we have. One more theme is a specific type of poverty, which is hunger. So World Bank, again, is our major institution dealing with development, defines that extreme poverty is actually hunger. So if people have no food, that goes even beyond the poverty. And they also define it so in many places, it's very hard to define using income. Even though it's easier to define poverty with income, but as I said, many developing countries rely on agriculture. So those poor people, there might be 2 people that have like 0 income, but one has a nice garden with all the food and gets all the nutrition he needs, and the other one has nothing and basically will die in 10 days if he will not get any help. So to capture that, there is a kind of international food poverty line, which is measured in calories per day. It's 2,000 calories per day for an adult. So the institutional economists, they measure how much calories a person gets constantly, average within the week, for example, and if 2,000 is defined as the poverty line, so food poverty line. So if below 2,000 per day, then you are basically hunger, and that's extreme case, and you need definitely some support with food. If you're above that, so again you can combine. You might have enough food, but you don't have any income. You are still not that bad. So That's one of the important issues here. That I think that's pretty much it, except the poverty trap. So the last thing I want to talk about is poverty trap. There is a common belief, especially here in US, that poor people want to be poor, and the problem is, so there are like two polar beliefs. One say that the person could be anyone he wants. So poor people wants to be poor, they just don't work enough or they are not smart enough, and it's all on them. There is another belief that is more European, socialistic, is that every person, and actually in Japan too, as I heard in the working culture, that's common belief that every person has certain skills and abilities to have and basically rights to have a decent life. So there are no people who are incapable to a level that they should be like homeless and poor and have hunger. There are just no such people. If there is a man, he at least should have a decent life and not to be poor. So with I mean, the result of the second one is that the government should provide some support for such people, educate them, solve the problem, because there is a potential with those people and they can become members of society, productive members of society. So there is a balance. I believe there is a balance, and that's what countries like the top countries in the most rankings like Sweden, Norway, Switzerland, Japan, they show. So the extreme level of this socialism, unfortunately, I experienced that in my life when the communism, where everyone is equalized, that is not working as well, because whatever you want in or not, we are different people. Some people are smarter, some people are stronger, people have different skills and different, also basically there is different demand for different type of skills on the labor market. So it's normal that they're not the same, and this idea of communism where everyone should be the same collapsed and resulted in lots of suffering for pretty much everyone. But on the other hand, this wild market capitalism, which is the theory, the first one, where everyone on its own, everyone gets what it deserved, it also leads to a lot of suffering, because pure wild market capitalism is very unfair, because those who are in power might not have the best skills. Maybe their parents had the best skills, or grandparents, or they just got lucky. That's in recent actually research shows that people really underestimate luck. Some people just got lucky, but they believe they are smarter or stronger, or they deserve more. So but at the moment they get the power in the free market capitalism, they abuse the power and they undermine the people without the power. And that's the moment where, even if you believe in free market competition like sports, or everyone for its own, that's fine. Everyone can choose what to believe. However, most of people will agree that there is a certain level of unfairness if the people within the government, they establish rules that prevent this free competition. So there is no free competition anymore, and there is a certain group of people that are provided with advantages, usually historically because their parents won this competition. So that's a bit unfair, and in the middle of this, or kind of balance of this, is this European market socialism, where the government try to support those who are poor, but we still provide competition level. However, this balance is extremely tough. In theory, it sounds like, okay, it makes sense, but in reality, it's very hard to find a balance, because you will have people who will abuse the system and not work enough, and then just being basically lazy, as free market capitalists usually argue there are just tons of lazy people. Some of them are lazy, but there is also another case. So if you help them kind of too much, or if you provide too nice activities, environment, then there will be no growth in productivity. However, again, the wild capitalist doesn't work as well. These two forces lead to the situation called poverty trap. Poverty trap, there are many reasons for that. There are psychological reasons. People think that poor people just cannot kind of get out from this because of their psychological thinking. But as economist, of course, I would prefer economic arguments. And economic arguments build, it's a actually quite long-lasting business argument that many top managers bring very often in different cases. And the argument is, if you are poor, you are kind of trapped with earning your food. You're seeking food. You work hard to get your food, so you have no time, no resources for investments and for development. So you spend 24/7. You basically just dedicate to get food for you and maybe your family. And if you don't have any time or resources for development, then you will of course stay like this. And similar to other traps, again known as managers, as I mentioned, mid-management trap. If you're a mid-manager, you dedicate all your time to your position without learning how to be a top manager. You will never go farther than that. So that's true basically for not just for poorer people, but for people in different classes and stages of life positions. If you don't invest time and money in development, you will not develop. And the poverty trap is extremely important because, again, if you want to solve global poverty in all the countries and in your country in particular, you need to understand that poor people will not get out of poverty on their own because they're trapped. They have no time and ability to invest in their development to get out from there. And here you can see the result, kind of the reason for not having this ability to invest might be both. Might be coming from free market capitalism, where they say they just don't want. They're lazy, they're just sitting on the couch and they don't want to develop. That might be true, but it's still a trap. And there is another reason that they are working all the time trying to find food and basic coverage like for their family, so they don't have any time and resources for investment. And that there are plenty of evidence that even here in the United States, a huge part of population, especially working for minimal wage, have no ability to develop. And that's one of the arguments for higher minimum wage. If you have a high established minimum wage, and we hear free market capitalists, they say, well, there will be a lot of unemployed and so on. That's partly true, at least from economic theory. But the other argument is that those people who work for minimum wage, they don't have a life. They just work all their life, but they cannot invest in their development. They cannot afford any decent education. There is no future for them. So if we want to claim we are a developed country, we need to lift these standards of living to the level that even the poorest working people can afford to invest in their future, so become not poor. And that's again a European way. They choose this. They have actually minimum wage around $25, and it's nice to travel. That's the best way. If you travel, you can see the difference. You pretty much, I don't recall finding any food like the cheapest food. It will not cost you like here in US, even in Hawaii, you can find something like $6 hamburger or something. Now in Europe, it will be more than 12 or something, with average food prices actually cheaper. So all services, low quality jobs, they got paid higher. So all services cost more. But on the other hand, you have people that are those who provide those services, they're quite satisfied with life. So you have more maybe balanced society with less conflicts between those different types of people. So it's very hard to understand what's right, what's wrong, because problems are everywhere. But that's kind of for you. That's a setting for you to think about and to analyze your own city, your neighborhood even, and to understand what you think is right. There is no answer for that, unique answer for everyone, but it's up to you to decide what's right. So think about, and that's it. Good luck.